Prologue. October 1988, Nepean River, Sydney, Australia. "That's impossible!" Gina's voice rose as she stared at her father. "Totally impossible." Her dad moved over on the grassy hillock where they'd been watching the head of the river rowing championships and put his arm around her. Gina shook off his embrace. "How can I be adopted? All those photos in my album," including photos of herself as a newborn, clearly labelled with the date she'd always celebrated as her birthday. "We took you home 3 days after you were born," her father said. So was the date on the photos her real birth date, or the date she went home from hospital? Had she been celebrating the wrong birthday all these years? Gina shivered and pulled her knees up towards her chest. Was it only this morning that she had been bubbling with excitement to go and watch her brother Bruce compete in the championships? Rowing was a family sport. Dad had missed out on the Commonwealth Games due to illness, but he had always dreamed that one of his sons might make it. To give the boys the greatest possible chance, they'd been sent to board at a top private school. It cost a fortune, but Bruce's first 8s and 4s were the favourites for this year. Gina jerked her chin towards the boats. "What about Bruce? And Grant?" "No, they're not adopted." Her father touched her shoulder and Gina willed herself not to push him away again. He was the one family member she was closest to. "We love you just as much as your brothers." Her eyes teared up. He might love her as much, but she couldn't say the same about her mother. Not that her mother was exactly a model of motherliness to Grant and Bruce either. They'd all been tiptoeing around her for years, anxious not to tip her over some unseen edge. Gina took a deep breath and deliberately relaxed her tense shoulders. "I had no idea." Her voice shook. "We all seem to fit together. I even look like you." "I love it when people say you look like me," her father said. "You've made me proud every day of your life. We didn't think we'd ever have children, and then you came along." Up until that moment, she'd never suspected she didn't belong. Her chest ached as though the wind had been knocked out of her. "Why didn't you tell me earlier?" "It was tricky," he said. "I wanted to tell you when you were 18, but your mother objected." So he'd backed down. Protecting mother had become the family's preoccupation. None of them wanted to ever again experience years like those when Gina was in junior high school. Back then, she'd had to help her father do all the housework because her mother had retreated into her own world. Gina had buckled down and carried far more of a load than any teenager should have to. Her cheeks flushed with past embarrassment. She had never mentioned her mother in case people asked questions. Sometimes her mother had been almost normal, just kind of spaced out. Yet other times she'd been downright peculiar. The problem was that Gina had never known at breakfast whether the day was going to be good or bad, and things often deteriorated rapidly. It had become easier to avoid inviting friends around altogether. And if Gina hadn't made that casual comment today about her disappointment with her own rowing form compared to her brother's, perhaps her father wouldn't have said anything. When had he intended telling her she was adopted? When she was about to get married? When she'd had a baby? When Mum died? In the rational part of Gina's brain, she understood there were problems with revealing the news at any time. But right now she wasn't feeling logical. Right now she was angry he'd left telling her until now, and she was disappointed that he had put her mother's needs ahead of hers, as usual. The rowers were now approaching the finish line. Gina couldn't see who was in the front, but it looked like a tight race. She got to her feet. Other groups scrambled up too, and tension crackled through the air. Would the favourites win, or would something unexpected happen?